And we continue with hour number 2 of Beyond the Beltway, coming to you from WCGO Radio in Evanston, Illinois. Nice to have you with us. In hour number 1, we've talked a lot about what's been happening in the last 48 hours, 72 hours in this country. And we want to continue our conversation of that, and also to mention to you that wherever you're listening this evening, there may be some unique things that are happening in your neighborhood. We would be interested in hearing what you have to say. And again, 1-800-723-8289. We're having a little problems with our phones this evening, but we'll do the best we possibly can. Joining us now to share their thoughts and differing opinions, we welcome Peter Hanna. Peter Hanna is an attorney. He also has done work with the ACLU in the past. He's also a professor of law. Derek Blakely joins us. He is a longtime reporter, now retired, for CBS 2 Chicago. And also joining us is Karen Sigelman, and she's our conservative in this hour, and she joins us from California. Karen, let me turn to you and ask the question. We've talked a lot about what's been happening in Chicago this first hour. Tell us what's happening in Los Angeles. It looks pretty bad on TV. Go ahead.
Bad on the ground as well. It's really just an absolutely stunning turn of events. I had been part of rallies to open the beach and open businesses a week ago, and we were maligned for our hate and wanting people to die for opening businesses. And just a scant few days later, we've got thousands of people burning cars, looting stores, all in close proximity to one another, taking over Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, the Grove Mall in Los Angeles, under the pretense of this is all about George Floyd, which obviously it's, looting stores has nothing to do with him.
To what extent is the National Guard? I know the National Guard was called in by the governor. To what extent have they shown any face in Los Angeles?
It looks like there's not much of anything, and it doesn't appear that there's really much will to stop anything. The new video is Santa Monica Place, a high-scale mall in Santa Monica, one of the more left-leaning places in the country, and just people running out of stores with arms full of jeans and sneakers and all of that, and there's literally nobody impeding them for that. So there's not really a presence. There's no will to stop it.
Peter Hanna, before we get to the specifics of what prompted all of this, as an observer, both legally and also home watching television, people seem to be taking advantage of this situation, and people are reacting to it because they don't like looters, they don't like arsonists, and being lost in this, I am concerned, is the reason why there should be legal protest in this country over what happened in Minneapolis. Are you worried about the messages being lost already?
No, I'm not worried about that. And I think what we have is a media that is much more interested in just highlighting, the work of, a few bad actors among a majority of people who are really fed up with what has become the norm in America, which is, our law enforcement agencies have been militarized. There are very few consequences for when our police officers kill people, more or less indiscriminately, or for a traffic stop or a allegedly counterfeit bill.
What about in this particular case? Is there a part of you that is pleasantly surprised that he was charged so quickly, the officer in this matter?
No, I'm completely disappointed. I think being charged with third-degree murder is kind of a farce. I think under the law of Minnesota, he should have been charged with at least, more honestly, fairly second-degree murder. And the truth is there's multiple other officers who have been fired, but are just, walking around, going to the store, having coffee, who are with him, who stood idly by while this man killed George Floyd. I'm not pleased at all.
I received a message via Facebook during the break, and they said that in something that they have read already, that one of the 4 officers supposedly said to turn Mr. Floyd over so he could breathe. Would in your mind, if that turns out to be true, does that change things for that officer? Does that officer get off less severely than the others might have?
If the officer said that, I think it ends up becoming really a question of fact for the jury. The jury would have to decide it. if I were if I were Keith Ellison or in a position where I could choose to bring, what charges the prosecutor, I would still bring that person in and I'd interview the person and I'd try to figure out, did they do enough? But you know what? If I see, you, Bruce, with your knee on someone's neck, and I say, hey, turn him over, and he dies, that's not enough for me. If I were a juror, I would. That doesn't get him off the hook for me.
Okay.
Bruce, can I interject
yes,
here for a moment?
This is Derek Blakely. Go ahead, Derek.
As reprehensible as all of the actors in George Floyd's death were, I think the three officers who stood around and basically did nothing just resonated with me, because it really points the finger at the question we've been talking about for years, which is this code of silence. And, the police squad cars say serve and protect, and too often it's to serve other officers and protect their own interests and cover their behinds. We talk about, you asked Peter about, whether it was just, Peter said, in fact, there's a few bad apples among the demonstrators. I don't accept the few bad apples kind of line with the police. I don't accept it with the demonstrators either, frankly, Peter. But this is an endemic problem. We talk about the good officers that were there. We talk about the good officers that are on the force. But if those other officers were part of those good officers on the scene that day, they did not show it, and they must be prosecuted. They must be prosecuted. And this is the core problem within the police. Not only that we have lousy police officers, but we have good police officers, supposedly, who fail to call out the bad ones when their misdeeds are obvious. And it happened in the shooting of Laquan McDonald here in Chicago, where a raft of officers changed a story that contradicted what was on videotape. And if that videotape wasn't there, not only would the officer there have gotten off scot-free, but so would these other officers, because you know what would have happened? They would have made up a story, concocted a cock and bull story to cover up what happened in the name of protecting each other. And it's right there for you to see, right there on videotape.
Can I pick up on something Derek said very briefly? Just one little point. In a police force, if you have 10 bad cops and you got 500 good cops, right? And the 500 good cops cover for the 10 bad cops, you have 510 bad cops. And that's the culture that we're dealing with. You can have a few bad apple, cops, but you got to have the rest not standing behind this thin blue line or blue wall of silence or whatever. And if they do, even if they're passively complicit, they're bad cops too. And we've tolerated that for too long. One cop can destroy an entire community or certainly anyone's life. And if they just let that slide, that's what's been happening again and again and again. And these protests aren't just a reaction to George Floyd. That's the match that, lit the powder keg. But, this shouldn't happen in America in 2020. And it happens every day. And actually, these types of police killings have only increased since 2014. Whenever you're talking on your show, Bruce, some of your, more conservative viewers.
One second.
No, we got to
pause. We got to pause. We're going to a break, and then we'll be back. I'm Bruce DuMont. Don't go away. Bruce DuMont back and Beyond the Beltway, hour number 2. Thank you for joining us tonight. Peter Hanna was going to make a point right before the commercial break. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, just a very, very brief point. I'm not sure we got cut off, but all I wanted to say is to the extent people out there are saying this is Donald Trump's fault, I think that's very foolish. Donald Trump is obviously an extremely bad actor and a corrupt person and an incompetent, president, far from a president. But please don't laugh, ma'am. Like, I'm trying to make a point. I'll give you the same courtesy when you speak. But the problems that we see today in America around our law enforcement, around, a lot of things, they began a long time ago. And there was a president who came before Donald Trump, who was in office for 8 years. That guy's name was Barack Obama. And he was a good and decent human. And I think he had everyone's interest in heart. But he was not an effective president. And he sat there and he did too little to stem these sorts of problems. So I'm Bruce, I'm not like a super partisan guy. Like I call it like it is. Right. I can objectively say Trump's a buffoon, and I can objectively say Obama didn't do remotely a fraction of enough and kind of led to this situation we're in now.
Right.
So I just want to put that out there because I think I'm so tired of the partisan nonsense. Like we have to call it as it is. This didn't happen in the past 3 years. America wasn't some sort of city on a hill in 2016. And,
I want to go back and ask Derek, because we have been at this situation before insofar a high visibility shooting of a black man, unarmed black man by white police officers, or in this case, being choked to death in essence. But there's a big brouhaha. Sometimes there's demonstrations. It's nothing like this. There has never been anything like this. The last thing I can remember, the Rodney King riots, or maybe the 1968 convention riots. But this is a bad situation. And my question to you, Derek, is where do we go next? Because you've seen this story before. What's next? Who does what? Derek, are you there?
He dropped out.
Derek, we dropped out. Can we please get him back? Is Karen there? Are you there?
I'm here. Yep.
All right, Karen. Let me ask you the same question. I mean, we have all seen this story before. I think we're tired of seeing the story. We'd like some movement, some resolution. What, as a conservative Republican, what can you bring to this discussion?
I've been wondering the same question for the last 24 hours, but frankly, all during the whole COVID nightmare that we've been faced with. There's two problems here. One is obviously the police brutality that was out of control and has been periodically, but let's not kid ourselves. There's a lot of brutality that's not police related, and there's a handful of white people also killed by police, and nobody's looting. So there's the police brutality thing, which is an absolute outrage, must be addressed. It's not like this was ignored. If third degree is not high enough, then let's bump it up. Let's bring in the other officers. Certainly, I couldn't agree more. But can we please recognize that this looting is not, it's exploiting this poor man's death. Even his fiance said, don't do this. And people still are doing this. This is hardly spontaneous protest. There's truckloads of bricks being dropped off in all of these places. There's rioting in San Clemente, Huntington Beach, Temecula. These are not hotspots for this kind of activity, but they are being exploited now. So where do we go from here? There's got to be a will to stand up against looting, against criminal behavior, against rioting. That has to stop. Yes, we have to deal with the police aspect of it, no question. But the response is not destroying Rodeo Drive. It's not destroying San Clemente, Santa Monica, stealing as many. Target right now, one of the few stores that had been allowed to be open throughout this entire COVID thing, Target is closing most of their stores, as is Walmart. Who does this benefit? And I would also add, minority-owned businesses are among those hurting the most. So I would suggest that part of the response to this should be addressing the fact that these rioters, in the name of this horrible death that nobody thinks should go unaddressed, they are destroying minority-owned businesses, people who struggled for their whole lives to open a business.
Derek, thank you very much. Derek is back. Derek, I want you to respond to some of the things that Karen said, and then I'll go back to the question I asked before we lost you, and that is arson and looting and rioting. They drive people crazy. I don't want to just say they drive white people crazy. I think they drive a lot of people crazy because they take the eye off, they take the media focus off what should be the story. And the story is what happened with a Minnesota cop up in Minneapolis. So my question to you is, how do we get back on track, and tell us why so many people get so upset with looting and rioting and arson?
Well, I think they get upset with it because it's chaos, it's disorder, and when it happens in minority communities, it really hurts the people in those communities. All you have to do is take a drive down West Madison Street in Chicago, which burned in the King riots 50 years ago.
Right.
And when people say nothing's changed in 50 years, they can take a ride down West Madison Street and just about prove it. So those are areas that are food deserts. Those are areas where there's no place to get a prescription filled, where there's nowhere to cash a check because there aren't any banks. And so those circumstances, and this has been studied, in many of the areas that were hit in those late 60s riots have never really come close to being recovered.
All right, let me just interject here, okay? That to me is so clear. And by the way, I was in the National Guard on West Madison, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And whenever I drive through that area, I just think, nothing's changed in 50 years. But my question to you is, why do I get it? Why do a lot of people get it, but some people in the black community, whether it's leaders or followers, and I'm talking about 50 years now, some people just don't get it. And yet it seems to be such a common sense thing. If you're concerned about food deserts and you want to go get your diabetes medicine, don't burn down the local CVS.
Well, a couple of things, Bruce. First of all, you're talking about a generation that wasn't even alive 50 years ago.
Yes.
Most of the people who are participating in these things don't have that, what's the phrase now, lived experience.
Yeah.
I was a high school kid then, so I remember that and I recall that, and I've seen the fruit that has been delivered from that or not delivered, the devastation that continues. And there is looting going on, for example, in Chicago, in some African-American neighborhoods now, today, right now.
Yep.
And
in suburbia.
But I would also say this. I would differentiate, and it's a very sharp difference. The rioting that happened in Chicago, downtown River North yesterday, there was not a large African-American participation in that. I've seen the pictures, I've talked to people who were there, and it's a marked contrast, say, to the Black Lives Matter protests that happened in the wake of Laquan McDonald shooting. Those were primarily led by African-American activists, old and young. Mm-hmm. They were largely peaceful. They shut down some stores because they blocked the entrances, but not because they were smashing and looting. And I think there were some people who were involved in yesterday who were more interested in destruction than protest. And that's a contrast to what happened in the Black Lives Matter movement.
Do you think that's Antifa? Do you think those are Antifa? That those are?
I don't know who Antifa is. I've heard about it. I mean, I've seen anarchists at work when I was reporting from Europe and Germany and France and places like that. I wouldn't just say I wouldn't say Antifa. I would just say people who kind of believe in anarchism. I would say that, yeah, there were some of those people here in Chicago. But I think we also cannot underestimate that this killing has kind of lit a match and has kind of, is a kind of tipping point for America. And some of the people, a lot of the people who are in the streets are simply saying, this is a vote of no confidence in police reform, no confidence in the form of policing that's going on, no confidence in the discipline of police through our criminal justice system, which is completely lacking. And you see how difficult it is to convict police officers in circumstances in which their misconduct is written large.
Derek, from a political standpoint, I'm going to ask Peter to answer this one, but we'll come back to you. Does it also say that they don't have confidence in a Democratic progressive mayor or a Democratic governor? Because where all the major disturbances have happened, that's right. The common denominator you've had. Peter Hanna, and again, I know you don't like to put in the Democratic stuff, but again, if you're looking for a common denominator, has there been too much
Yeah, but you're,
permissive
I think,
attitude on the part of the police in some of these areas?
no, I think you're confusing causation and correlation. Our cities historically have had Democratic leaders for a very long time. I don't think it has to do with that. I think what it has to do with is sense of real lack and loss of hope. And I can tell you this, if the two presidential candidates that we have to look forward to November inspired even the slight bit amount of hope that things would be better, I don't think you'd have this. I don't think you have this in June, May of 2008 for Obama runs. I think people
We've got
look to
to
November and
pause. I hate to interrupt you again. We do have to pause. We'll come back to Peter. I'm Bruce DuMont. Don't go away. Bruce DuMont back. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. I'd like to take a moment now to let each of our distinguished guests this evening take a moment to introduce themselves, and we begin with Peter Hanna. Peter?
attorney and professor of law. I am a progressive. I don't really have any allegiance to any particular political party or anything like that, but I do have allegiance to sensible policy that improves the lives of all Americans.
And Derek Blakely.
Yes, Derek Blakely. I'm a native Chicagoan. I've spent 41 years in television news. I was a network correspondent for CBS in Chicago, in London, and in Bonn. But for more than 30 years, I've been a TV reporter in Chicago. Just retired last year. Now do a little teaching at DePaul and a little writing for a local political website known as the Center for Illinois Politics.
And do you like the fact, because you and I are Facebook friends, do you like the fact now that you can offer your political opinions and thoughts with your Facebook friends, as opposed to supposedly zipping them up as a reporter?
I do. I do. I enjoy that. I don't enjoy a lot of the partisan bickering and name calling, and that I think cheapens and coarsens political discussion. But I do like being able to make a point or give some insight. And, I think people on both sides have interesting things to say and interesting things to contribute. One of Donald Trump's tweets today, he said, there are organized groups that have nothing to do with George Floyd. Sad. And I think there were some organized groups involved in some of the unrest. And I think that is sad. But that doesn't make everything else that Donald Trump says correct. Right. But a broken clock is right twice a day, right?
Let me let Karen introduce yourselves, and then I want a follow-up question with Peter.
I'm now under house arrest, so unrest, I think, is understating it, as is people losing their livelihoods. I'm Karen Sigmund. I was a scientist for 20 years doing underwater acoustics during the Cold War. I became a teacher and professor of math and other things. And most recently, I'm the president of the American Freedom Alliance, an organization dedicated to preserving freedoms and indeed to ensuring freedom, fairness, the best possible lives for the most number of people. So I'm also active in the Republican Party, but the American Freedom Alliance is where my heart lies.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, for those that like freedom and fairness, we want to remind you that Beyond the Beltway is looking for some support through our GoFundMe campaign. So if you go to GoFundMe, you can look up Beyond the Beltway, or if you just go to beyondthebeltway.com, you'll see my smiling face, and you can contribute to the ongoing production costs of this program, which are they're getting up there, and any support that you could provide to keep this show alive and well, we do appreciate it. And again, tomorrow we're in the countdown to our 40th anniversary. We've got 4 more shows. The last Sunday in June will be the 40th anniversary of this program, so we hope that you'll be with us each and every Sunday night, as hopefully you have for many, many years. Peter Hanna, I want to go back to you because the president said that he wants to designate an Antifa as a terrorist organization. You don't represent the ACLU on this program, but You certainly have been very active with them. What's your reaction to the president's move to go after Antifa?
Oh, I mean, it's just political theater. I mean, Antifa, if anyone looks into the organization, it's a decentralized organization of different disparate interests who, take an approach or take stands against fascism. Some of them pursue more violent and aggressive means to do so that I don't approve of. And I don't approve of any looting or violence at all. And I think, they're not it's like saying I'm going to declare, I don't know, diabetics a terrorist organization. It doesn't make any sense. It's just sort of like a loose affiliation of people who are united by like one thing, their opposition to fascism, which obviously is becoming very prominent, these days. So I think it's just something that some red meat he's throwing for the base because, they need a villain. They need a villain. And it's not easy for the president to say, yeah, the guy who killed George Floyd and those cops are terrible, and have like the rest of the world basically agree Donald Trump needs like a polar sort of like enemy at all times. And right now, Antifa is the one that he's highlighting to be that enemy.
Well, he was very upset with the police officer involved. Maybe not as upset as you would like him to be, but again,
no. That's what I'm saying.
He was pretty quick to that. Yeah,
he's aligned with the rest of the world. I mean, people who are Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, progressive, regressive. Everyone who saw the video thinks it's a grievous harm on American society and people of color. But he needs an enemy, and Antifa is the enemy that he has now selected for his base.
I want to go back, Derek. We'll start with you. I want to go back to that moment when I think America was unified in their disgust for the actions of the Minnesota police officer. And it seemed to me that it was a moment where literally everybody was, probably 99% of the people were infuriated with what happened. So how did that moment of national unity, how did that get hijacked so quickly because of the actions of the mob, whether the mob being legitimate protesters or legitimate protesters who could not police their own ranks and allow them to be infiltrated by those who were either Antifa or right of center or looters or just hooligans or thugs? I mean, that happened within 24 hours.
Bruce, I don't disagree. I think I said earlier, I think that the rioting and the looting does take the focus off the horror of what happened in Minneapolis in terms of the death of George Floyd. But I also think that we really need to focus on measures, what can we do to restore confidence of the people in the streets, of the people in the communities, in policing and in justice and in the justice system. This is someone I don't usually agree with very much, but Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota said she's going to propose a bill, and I don't think this is going to get very far, but a federal agency that would investigate officer-involved shootings and use of excessive force. Now, that would, I know, trample federalism and local prosecutions and all kinds of lines that we usually have set up in this country. But when you see what's happening in the streets, if something like that would give a measure of, restore a measure of confidence to people that wrongdoings will be prosecuted and limited, I think it's something that should be and has to be considered.
Karen, what's your reaction to that? I don't want to get Peter, but what's your reaction to that of a Justice Department strike force that whenever there was a police shooting, they would automatically come in, they would take control of the internal investigation, and they would make recommendations back to the local prosecutor, who then could vote up or down on their investigation. But it would be removed from the politics of and the heat of the specific city.
I think having independent inquiries into things is a good idea. I don't have an issue with that at all. I would not necessarily see it as at the federal level at all. But I think investigations into police misbehavior, as any misbehavior, isn't a bad idea. as far as Antifa, though, I wanted to ask you, do you really think that these nationwide protests were somehow spontaneous and that Antifa or a like organization isn't involved? And I would ask,
No, I don't.
considering that there's 500, the 500 police officers and 10 bad apples, is it wrong to go after those 10 bad apples if those 10 are Antifa? It seems like you're demonizing Donald Trump for trying to get to some of the roots of this problem.
You asked me a question. I'll give you my answer. I think there are more than a few bad apples. I think there's more than a few bad apples that are out on the streets utilizing and taking advantage of this situation. And I think there's more than just a few bad apples who in their hearts, they don't really care too much about what happened in Minneapolis. Peter, your reaction.
I agree.
So there's a couple of points, but I'll probably be interrupted by a commercial, so I'm sorry.
No, you got a couple of minutes.
But first off, again, Karen, these protests were largely organized by Black Lives Matters. That's the primary group. It was Antifa doesn't have a website or like a list.
And Antifa, don't underestimate their reach,
Karen,
even though they don't have a website.
Karen,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Peter. I'm just saying,
don't patronize me.
Then don't interrupt me, and maybe you will actually hear what I have to say, right?
Go ahead.
So what I'm trying to tell you is Antifa does not have a website or a Twitter or a listserv to share their plans. Word spreads other ways. And they weren't the organizers. The Black Lives Matters folks were the organizers. The number of bad apples, whatever. It could be a few, it could be many. But it's really funny to me that the story is not the fact that we have a corrupt, broken, farcically militarized law enforcement apparatus across the country that kills people more or less, way too much. It's that like some people stole a TV from Target and like the looters and the rioters. I don't agree with any of that. There shouldn't be any looting. There shouldn't be any rioting. There shouldn't be any arson. There shouldn't be any violence. Zero. I have no tolerance for it. But I do also have a problem with the fact that the narrative is not about the deeper, bigger issue. The deeper, bigger issue is the law enforcement situation. And Representative Omar's plan, it's complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense because another president could come in, appoint a new DOJ, new attorney general, and have the thing disbanded. If you want to get to the root of this, what we need is state by state bills and laws that say if you are an officer, if you're a police officer.
1 second. I hate to do it. Back with your final word in a moment. Bruce DuMont. Bruce DuMont back from Evanston, Illinois, and after our broadcast this evening, I'm going to try to make it back to my home in downtown Chicago, and most of downtown Chicago is cordoned off in a variety of different ways, so I'm going to have to find some way to sneak through the police lines to get back to my house. It's very tense in the city of Chicago this evening, and the National Guard has been called out to direct traffic. The governor made a very clear point that they were not there to confront any demonstrators. They just wanted to say, we're going to direct traffic. So I don't know whether that's going to scare anybody or not. But anyway, I want to thank also Michael Capicelli. At the beginning of our program this evening, for the first time in a long, long time, we have a brand new opening to this program if you're watching it in any video format. And Michael Capicelli did a great job in producing that for us. We appreciate Mikey's work on that. And also, I want to give a big thank you to Andrew Marshall, who's the producer of this program, who graduated from New Trier High School yesterday. And there was a big party last night. You were able to go out. Were you able to get 10 people together, or were you limited?
We were relatively limited, but we're continuing the celebration tonight. So.
Very good. And he's going to head off to Hofstra University and become a big network star and hire me when I get very, very old. Although I'm actually very, very old right now. Peter Hanna, I don't mean to do this, but you've made brilliant points right up to the commercial break each time this evening, so I'm going to let you finish the point you were in the middle of when the theme music came on.
I'm just teasing you, Bruce, and teasing the other guests. The point I was going to make is very simple. If you want to really reduce police violence, the types of violence that we've seen, you just have to pass one law. And I would call on any legislators and folks, policymakers, to consider this.
Mhm.
We need a law that says basically, if you're a police officer and you commit unwarranted violence against the public or engage in acts of corruption, you lose your pension and you can't be rehired in a law enforcement position ever again. That's it, plain and simple. And I think with that sort of incentive, you end up having people be a little bit more careful and be a little bit more reticent to drop their knees on a man who's handcuffed lying down. We'll have less Eric Garners and less George Floyds and less, CEOs and so on and so forth.
That sounds like a simple solution. Karen, could you agree with that?
Love it. How do you define unwarranted? Obviously, in this particular case, it appears that it was completely unwarranted. I think that's where you wind up having things be tricky. It's my understanding that now, if a police officer does commit an act that winds up in the death of somebody in a manner that's unwarranted, already there's tremendous punishment. You can increase that punishment, but one of the things that happened after the hands up, don't shoot lie, right? We all know that never actually happened that way. But one thing that we saw was that because of what came down against the police at that time, the unbelievable anti-police rhetoric, the police stopped doing the policing kinds of things that they're supposed to be doing, the to serve and protect, the protecting, the peacekeeping. So if it's always a balance. There's always going to be a balance.
But should there be should there be a limit, Derek Blakely? Should there be a limit to the number of beefs that you can lodge against a police officer? Because if somebody has 10, 20 beefs against him, I mean, doesn't that indicate that person maybe at least should be given a second look, or maybe put on a desk somewhere?
I think it might. The problem is, again, the leniency that I was talking about before in terms of police discipline. One of the things Minnesota did, was at least fire these guys. Do you know how long it takes to fire a Chicago police officer?
A long time.
A long time. Ridiculously long. And, superintendents here have tried to, fire people, and then the police board will give them a slap on the wrist, or the system is too convoluted without enough direct responsibility, here at least. But I want to make one other point, Bruce, and I think it's really salient. Most of these protesters who are involved, I would say practically all of them, right, around the country, are very much anti-Donald Trump.
Right.
And yet this very kind of civil unrest is a godsend for President Trump.
Yes.
And, you can bet your bottom line that he is going to use this in the campaign as something to try to beat Democrats over the head with. He's already done it with Democratic mayors. He's going to accuse the party of being soft on crime or soft on unrest. And we can shake our heads about it, but that's one of the ways that Richard Nixon got reelected in 1968. The history is there, the template is there, and talk about unintended consequences. If these protesters knew that they were playing into the hands of reelection of Donald Trump, it would be a very cruel irony.
That's why I wanted to make the point about just the common sense. The common sense of this is just it's so against those of what they really want. And again, you were absolutely right. I was thinking of 1968, which is the silent majority, and I can see those spots being made right now. And right now at this moment, and again, only Donald Trump's mouth, I think, can keep him from being reelected. Not elected, unelected. And again, because there's always the ability for him to say something really stupid. But right now, I think the tension of the country is the irate nature that they should have against the police officer, and horrible conduct, but that police officer has been arrested or replaced by the lawlessness that's in society, and that's what people are watching on television almost 24/7 right now. On that note, I have to say farewell. Peter Hanna, thank you very much. It's nice to have you back on the program. Karen Sugerman, nice to have you from Los Angeles. Derek Blakely, thank you very much for being with us on your maiden voyage. Hopefully you'll come back and be with us again. Andrew Marshall is the producer of this program again. Congratulations on your graduation. I'm Bruce DuMont. Until next week, this is Bruce DuMont. Good night from Evanston, Illinois.